It was their hard work and dedication that allowed this society to thrive for 110 years. We also, yes, thank you. We also keep in our prayers tonight our good friend Tom Gallagher, who is in the hospital tonight and has been for the past couple days. Gal, you are in our thoughts and prayers. I am proud to share this day with my father-in-law, Willard Weisenfluh, who is attending this dinner for the first time. My brothers-in-law, Chris McGrath, Joe Collins, Jim O'Rourke, and Brian James. My uncles, Edward, George, and Bill Lynett, and my nephews, Jimmy and Chris McGrath, who actually helped with our flag bearers' duties tonight. I also celebrate with many cousins and friends, too many to mention. I did want to mention a few good friends at Table 4 who came from different parts of the country to be with us tonight. They are Steve Campbell from New York, Tim Casper from New Jersey, Dan McBride from Boston, and Pat McDevitt all the way from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Three Irishmen and a German, not bad. Thanks, guys, for making the effort to be here tonight. It really means a lot to me. I would like to mention for a second my brother-in-law, Dave Weisenfluh, who is unable to be with us this evening. He is traveling for work and is very disappointed to miss the dinner. I would like to thank my mother, Celia, who has been a tremendous help throughout the year as I put this dinner together. As some of you may know, one of my mother's best and dearest friends is House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. My mother, yes. My mother worked tirelessly in my efforts to get the Vice President to accept our invitation, but we have Nancy Pelosi to thank for her efforts in getting the Vice President home. I send best wishes to my sisters, Jeannie, Mari, Celia, and Katie, and sisters-in-law, Sarah, Megan, and Chrissy, and their families who have been a great support throughout this past year. I would like to say a special hello to my beautiful wife, Wendy, who in addition to being my best friend, also happens to be one of the best mothers I have ever known, to our two beautiful girls, Liza and Gia. I want to thank her for the constant friendship and support. Wendy is at home tonight hosting a few friends with my mom, her mother, Betty Weisenfluh, and all of our sisters. And it turns out the Vice President's sister is with them tonight as well. I'm sure they're having a wonderful evening. I would like to take a moment and thank our officers, Michael Cummings and Art Jordan, and especially our secretary, Harry Kelly, and our treasurer, Bobby Lynett. They are an enormous help to me and do most of the heavy lifting throughout the year. I would like to thank our historian, Bill Pryle, who is without a doubt the heart and soul of this organization. Thank you, Mr. Pryle, for everything you do for the Friendly Sons. Finally, I want to thank you, the members of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick of Lackawanna County, and our friends and guests for being here tonight. I often reflect on the awesome history of this organization, the 110 years of dinners. I often think what it would have been like to be at the Casey Hotel or the Hotel German, St. Mary's Center, or here at Genetti Manor, when my great-grandfather, E.J. Lynett, who stood at this podium 106 years ago as the fourth president of our society, as he introduced the legendary international president of the United Mine Workers of America, John Mitchell, as his principal speaker. I think how cool it must have been to be in the ballroom on the nights Harry Truman addressed the Friendly Sons. President Truman appeared before this society twice, once as a senator from Missouri and once as a former president of the United States. Or the night in 1968 when our Judge Richard P. Conaboy introduced Vice President Hubert Humphrey as the principal speaker. That was the only time a sitting vice president attended our dinner before tonight. Or the famous night Judge William Nealon introduced Robert F. Kennedy to this group for his first public appearance since the assassination of his brother, President John F. Kennedy. This society made up of fathers and sons, grandfathers and grandsons, has welcomed many U.S. senators, congressmen, and governors, too many to mention. Prominent leaders in the Catholic Church and an impressive list of Irish dignitaries have graced our dais over the years. That great tradition continues tonight. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for the honor of representing you as the 110th President of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick of Lackawanna County. Since taking over as President of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick at last year's dinner, I have come to realize that our society enjoys many traditions that are passed on from year to year. In many ways, it is these traditions that make our society so special. One of these great traditions, whenever possible, is for the president of the society to have his brother serve as Toastmaster for his dinner. I have been extremely blessed in my life to have two brothers, Matthew and Daniel, who I have been particularly close to both in age and friendship. My brother Matthew gave me one of the true honors in my life when he asked me to be his Toastmaster at his dinner 7 years ago. And now I have the good fortune to ask Daniel to do the same. Well, you got one guy clapping for you, Daniel. So tonight, it gives me great pleasure to announce my little brother and one of my best friends, Daniel Patrick Haggerty, as our Toastmaster for the 110th annual dinner. For those of you who know Daniel, most will agree that he is smart, thoughtful, kind, and funny. Well, I certainly hope he's funny tonight. Daniel is a graduate of Scranton Prep and received his Bachelor of Arts from the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. He earned his law degree and a master's degree in business administration from Villanova University. After law school, Daniel clerked for the Honorable Thomas I. Vanaski, Chief Judge of the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania, and current judge for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. After several years as publisher of the Citizen's Voice in Wilkes-Barre and the Hazleton Standard Speaker, Daniel embarked on his new career. He is currently the owner and president of PMJ Group, a business brokerage firm located in Clarks Summit, Pennsylvania. Daniel previously served our society for 4 years as assistant secretary and secretary. He is married to the former Megan Stott, and they are the proud parents of their son, Daniel Jr., and expecting child number 2 in July. Now, I said Daniel is very smart, and that is true, but he also can be a bit of an airhead. I have one quick story that I believe makes my point. During the summer between Daniel's second and third year of law school at Villanova, one of his best friend's father died. The gentleman was from the Philadelphia area, and Daniel rightly wanted to attend the wake and funeral. Daniel was having a difficult time finding directions to the funeral home. Remember now, this was the days before Google Maps and GPS systems. After hearing Daniel complain a few times about not having directions to the funeral home, my father finally said to him, "Why don't you just call the funeral home and ask for directions?" Daniel said it was too early to call. My father said, "What do you mean it's too early to call?" Daniel replied, "The newspaper says friends may call 2 to 4, 7 to 9. That's a third-year law student we're talking about. So now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our Toastmaster for the 110th annual dinner, my brother and one of my best friends, Daniel Patrick Haggerty.
Thank you, Jimmy. I wish I could deny that story. Oh, Ireland, isn't it grand you look, like a bride in her rich adornin', and with all the pent-up love of my heart, I bid you the top of the morning. And I bid you all the top of the evening, and welcome to the 110th annual Friendly Sons of St. Patrick of Lackawanna County. First, I want to congratulate my brother Jimmy on his presidency of the Friendly Sons. He has led our society this past year with distinction. Second, I'd like to thank Jimmy for the honor of serving as Toastmaster at this year's dinner. As Jimmy said, and as you all know, there is a long tradition in the Friendly Sons of the president choosing his brother as Toastmaster. Or, as Scranton School Board President Cy DeWihe described me, clearly the most qualified candidate. Somehow, Jimmy conducted a national search for Toastmaster and still chose his brother. Jimmy is a graduate of Scranton Prep and Villanova University and is currently an independent insurance agent with the local agency Joyce, Jackman & Bell Insurers. After serving as the head boys basketball coach at Scranton Prep, Jimmy went on to serve as an assistant coach at his alma mater, Villanova University, under head coach Jay Wright, and later worked as an assistant coach at NYU and Columbia University. During dinner tonight, Father Keller told me that Jimmy's last coaching stop at Columbia University really surprised him. That of all the Haggertys who attended Scranton Prep, Jimmy was the one who ended up in the Ivy Leagues. Those of you that know Jimmy know that once he commits himself to something, he goes all in. In addition to being this year's president of the Friendly Sons, Jimmy's also serving as president of the Country Club of Scranton. I haven't determined if Jimmy is simply a glutton for punishment or just needs occasional reprieve from the 3 women living in his house. I have seen firsthand how Jimmy has worked tirelessly over this past year planning this year's dinner. And in the storied tradition of the Friendly Sons, we are in for a truly special evening. Before I continue, I'd like to send a special St. Patrick's Day greeting to my wife, Megan, who is in Syracuse tonight, coming down the home stretch of her radiation oncology residency at Upstate Medical Center. Megan is returning home this summer to join Dr. Harmer Brereton's group at NROC. Megan's talents as a doctor are only outdone by her talents as a mother to our 11-month-old son, Daniel Patrick, and baby number 2 we are expecting in July. In addition to my 2 brothers, I also have the pleasure of being joined tonight by 7 brothers-in-law and many nephews, cousins, uncles, and friends. Some out-of-town friends have traveled great lengths to be with us tonight from Connecticut, Syracuse, Boston, Chicago, New York City, and even North Scranton. A few places which also know a thing or two about celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Thank you guys at table number 5 and table number 57 for being here to celebrate with us tonight. Gentlemen, my job tonight is to move the program along, and I intend to do that with dispatch. However, before I forget, Gus Giannetti asked me to make an announcement. Gus has a phone call in his office for Commissioner Pat O'Malley. Bruce Jenner is on the phone. Apparently Bruce is going through a change and wanted to talk to Pat about some advice. As a brother, I would put my resume up against anyone's. Jimmy and I have been brothers for just under 40 years. Jimmy is my big brother, who slowly but surely has become my little brother. And like a lot of big brothers, Jimmy was always a coach and a mentor and supported me in every way possible. Along with our brother Matthew, Jimmy has become a trusted advisor and a best friend. Believe it or not, Jimmy and I were roommates up until 3 short years ago, when, to all of our surprise, Jimmy finally got engaged. In fact, we both got engaged just a few weeks apart and married shortly thereafter. The phrase I always use to describe Jimmy is that he is the guy you would want next to you in your foxhole. Not to mention the fact that he'd usually have a couple cold Budweisers in hand to help pass the time. I am grateful for Jimmy's invitation and proud to serve our society in this role. As you can all imagine, serving as Toastmaster can be a daunting task. And over recent weeks, I reflected on two critical pieces of advice. First, I called Monsignor Joe Quinn, who was a dear family friend, and asked him, Monsignor, what one piece of advice would you give me as Toastmaster? Monsignor Quinn laughed and said he asked that same exact question over 30 years ago as he was preparing for his dinner. And he called Monsignor Andrew McGowan, who said simply, Joe, keep your eyes on the headlines. Apparently, Monsignor Quinn took that advice to heart because for the last 30 years, Monsignor Quinn has been keeping us all laughing with Scranton's headlines. The second piece of advice that has echoed in my head was from our father. As Jimmy and Matthew can relate, the exchange of advice in the Haggerty house often sounded a little something like this. Danny, listen to me, buddy. You've got to get your shit together. So as for Monsignor's advice on the headlines, Attorney General Kathleen Kane was in the news again and again and again. Her staff has had more departures than the mall at Steamtown. Most recently, the Attorney General hired a press secretary from Arkansas to help rebuild her public persona. Press secretary for Attorney General Kathleen Kane. That job is so bad Corey O'Brien didn't apply for it. Believe it or not, there were a few jobs Corey passed up in recent years, and we were able to get our hands on the list of the top 5 jobs in northeastern Pennsylvania that are so bad Corey O'Brien didn't apply for them. Number 5, chairman of the pension board, City of Scranton. Number 4, tour guide, Keystone Sanitary Landfill. Number 3, chairman of the ethics committee, Scranton School District. Number 2, insurance agent, Montage Mountain. And the number 1 job that was so bad Corey wouldn't apply for it, running mate, Jim Wanzak. There were a couple movies recently in the headlines that had strong local ties. Our AAA baseball team, the Rail Riders, recently unveiled a lineup of local ownership. In fact, one of the new owners is a filmmaker, and he announced he wants to film an upcoming movie in Scranton. The film is called The Last Invisible Boy. It highlights the political career of Scranton Mayor Bill Courtright. It turns out Congressman Matt Cartwright is a big movie buff. So we called the congressman to get his review of the movie, and he said, Cartwright, I just wish they'd stop confusing me with that guy. That's it, Bill. You're done. There was another popular movie with local ties. It was actually nominated for an Academy Award for Best Ensemble Cast, and it stars the applicants for the vacant Lackawanna County Commissioner's position. The cast includes former Mayor Jim Connors, former County Commissioner Joe Corcoran, and former Representative Ed Staback. The movie is called 50 Shades of Grey. Speaking of Academy Awards, this year's winner for Best Cell Phone Reception was Scranton Councilman Pat Rogan. Apparently, building a 120-foot cell tower in your front yard works wonders for your cell phone reception. Is Pat Rogan with us here tonight? Pat, can you hear me now, Pat? Can you hear me now? Come to think of it, the only guy in the county with better cell phone reception is Lackawanna County Sheriff Paul Nardozzi. In addition to those couple of movies, there were also a few notable quotes this past year. And gentlemen, these quotes will be verbatim, incredibly so. State Representative Frank Farina, when asked to state his position on the landfill, and I quote, "As a state representative, I have to support our laws and regulations as they were written by our prior legislators for all my constituents." Huh? Someone should remind Frank that his title is actually lawmaker, as in, I make the laws. The second quote was from Commissioner Jim Wanzak in refusing to even take a position on the landfill. And I quote, "I have been dealing with 8 million other issues here." 8 million is a lot of issues, Jim. It turns out Jim Wanzak has been buried with all the photos submitted along with the resume of Pat O'Malley. The final quote came from Kyle Donahue, Scranton School District Public Relations Chairman, on the search for a new superintendent. And I quote, "At this point in time, no one trusts this board." Now that's exactly what you want in a public relations chairman. Gentlemen, in a few minutes, I will introduce tonight's dais. Before I do that, some of you may have noticed some guys are missing from the dais from previous years. Former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett is absent this year. Tom Corbett made history as Pennsylvania's governor in his first term by not having a second term. Former Pennsylvania State Treasurer Rob McCord missed the dinner this year. Rob had his sights set on the White House, and now he's trying to avoid a stint in the Big House. Former Scranton Mayor Chris Doherty is not on the dais tonight. We all miss former Mayor Chris Doherty. I know on a night like tonight, I definitely miss Mayor Doherty. It turns out Chris wanted to retire from public office, and after this brutal winter, Chris finally decided to move to a warmer climate. So he built a treehouse in Florida. And finally, former Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justice Seamus McCaffrey is not with us this year. Jimmy and I can't figure that one out. We emailed Seamus the invitation, but I think he was afraid to open the attachment. There were certainly some strange stories in the headlines this past year, and this is a true story. A few months ago, a family of 3 black bears wandered onto the runway at the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton International Airport, which quickly became a very dangerous situation. What was not reported in the newspaper was that the county commissioners had to call a top-secret meeting to determine how to deal with the situation. And we were able to get our hands on the minutes from that top-secret meeting. Many local officials were in attendance and came up with some